Добрий день. Мене звати Raya Dzulyńska. My name is Raissa Dzulynsky. Today, I'll be interviewing Marusia Petryshyn, our sixth alumni of the Alumni video series. Marusia was the director of the Ukrainian Language Education Center at the Ukrainian Institute of Ukrainian Studies, at the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies in Edmonton, Alberta. She was elected to be president of SUSK in 1970. Thank you for joining us.
Дякую, Раїса. Приємно тебе запізнати.
My first question is, where did you go to university and what did you study?
I guess I started university when I was 17 at the University of Alberta. I think I changed my major 3 times first year, but eventually I settled in political science and sociology, and that's what I got my Bachelor of Arts in. And after I finished that Bachelor of Arts, I got very involved in SUSK and its activity. And in 1972, I moved with Marusia Petryshyn to England. And there I was a special student and then eventually started a master's in sociology. And then we returned to Canada, had 2 boys, and I returned to law school and finished a law degree. So that's kind of my educational background.
Very well educated then.
Yeah, very well educated.
What was your involvement in SUSK?
Well, my involvement in SUSK began in my undergraduate years. We had a very nice student club with very, a really good membership and activity. And our club did join SUSK. I remember going to a conference in Winnipeg and was at that time quite a dominant stream in SUSK was, were fellows in suits and briefcases. And I knew that I didn't like that. And after I finished my degree, I was working in the mountains, and my sister Irka, who was the head of the student club in Edmonton, called me and asked me if I was going to the Vancouver Congress. And I said, no, I just had no interest in being Ukrainian anymore. And however, I had 2 friends who were going to go to Vancouver. So I was going to be in Vancouver anyway. And of course, the Vancouver Congress was for me a big changing point. And it turned out to be very inspiring for me, something that was very interesting. It was focused on change in the community, on growth in the community, on, I guess even at that point, it must have been looking at multiculturalism, but certainly at some point, it was flagged for us that this was an important issue. And at that time, the Royal Commission of Bilingualism and Biculturalism was doing its work, and the 4th volume was coming out. And that's kind of our, the indicated to people who were of other ethnic groups that that was an important volume. It was important to respond to it. And there was no going back after that. I think I must have spent 1 more year in Edmonton. But the next summer, I was a field worker for SUSK in Thunder Bay. So we went through, I think, a week, if not 2 weeks of training prior to that. So we were trained on multiculturalism, on community development. And that always, those 2 elements were really important to me in my further work and worldview. After that, I became president, and we continued with the fieldwork project. And in the fieldwork project, different field workers had different areas to explore. I was in Thunder Bay, where there was some advanced work being done on community television with the coming of cable television. So that kind of dates me. I mean, there was a time when there was no cable television, if you can believe it. But with the coming of cable television, there was the requirement that there be some community programming. And Thunder Bay had a really interesting group working on that aspect. I also organized a multicultural conference in Thunder Bay, which was also very, very rewarding. Thunder Bay is a very multicultural city. And I would have to go back to the records of that conference to see whether First Nations were involved, but that, that may have been a big gap, so to speak. So, so in the summer that, so I worked in the SUSK office. It was established prior to that by Bogdan Kravchenko, and that executive was a little back shack on Harbor Street. And the projects for that year were fieldwork, but focused on the audio, well, I suppose on broadcasting, on audio visual. So from those field workers, there were many that ended up in the media. So you had Halia Kuchmi and Ihor Petryshyn and Yvonne Fassan and a group of people who eventually ended up in media and being quite influential. Okay. And I think after that, we went to England.
Okay, so that's a bit off script. I'm just curious, what was it? So you said that, you were working in the mountains somewhere, and you had decided that, you didn't care about being Ukrainian anymore. What was it? Do you remember specifically at the Congress or the conference that brought you back and kind of convinced you that there is value in being involved with your culture?
Well, number one, the people at the Congress were people that I could really relate to. So that was very refreshing to find like-minded people. Secondly, they were talking about a non-ossification. I mean, in our community, perhaps at that time, there was a lot of very traditional activity. And I'm not a very traditional person, so that doesn't work for me. And I remember there was one paper by Marusia Petryshyn, who I eventually, we eventually married. But in his paper, he talked about ossification, that we did not want to have ossification of the community. And so I think what was important was to see the community as growing, as evolving, as needing people, not to conform, but to contribute.
I think about that in today's Ukrainian community. I'm curious, do you see parallels in today's, there's like the Vachvelia, lots of Novy Pribuli coming, or here now. I'm curious whether you see a relation there or parallel.
Well, I see it not just for the Vachvelia. I see it for everybody who identifies with being Ukrainian. And that is that the challenges that you face as young people are really huge. There's the whole question of, the earth itself, the climate, how we're caring for people. I think that the pandemic has been really important in highlighting many cracks in our system. The other thing that I personally concerned about is that very often people who are very talented do not want to work in and for the community. And we have established a number of very important institutions that require talented people to continue. And And that's why I would encourage people, and of all generations, it doesn't have to be, you don't have to speak Ukrainian perfectly, or, or be of a certain chvila. But consider the fact that you are part of a community that does require care, growth, to meet the challenges.
Yeah, I think that's something we definitely agree with at SUSK, kind of being a progressive group that's inclusive of whichever kind of Ukrainian you are, that it doesn't matter. I'll jump back to the actual questions. Going a little bit of a tangent there, myself. So my next question is, what was your involvement in your USO, in your student club?
Well, I'm sure I had some kind of executive function. What we did at that time, we put on the Christmas Eve supper, at the club. And it was, and we were just beginning to enter the contact with SUSK as a change org. And so I don't really remember too much about that activity.
Problem. The next question is, what's your current occupation? And I understand that you're now retired, so feel free to discuss what your occupation was, or and any volunteer positions that you may hold now.
Yes. I guess the work at which I worked the longest was as the it didn't start as director of the Ukrainian Language Education Center. It started with, 1 day a week at the center, and then 1 day a week at Alberta Education. And what was important for me at that point was that my children were, I think 3 or, no, wait a second. No, well, they were getting to the point where the Ukrainian that I knew was running out for them. Children grow very rapidly, and probably our level of Ukrainian runs out by age 3. They are then looking at items that are much more advanced than what our language can allow for. And also I was quite interested in making sure that we didn't have a lot of very traditional material for the children, because some of those values I didn't agree with. There was a lot that I did agree with. One of the things that really struck me during my work is, as we were developing certain materials, we actually collected a group of what we called Ukrainian elders. These were people that we had respected and wanted, and we gathered them for a session to establish what are the Ukrainian values that we want to see permeate the resources that we're developing. And the result of that session was very inspiring. So for example, I'll just give you an example of some things, is that rather than seeing ourselves as being superior to other people, we are, in fact, see different ethnicities and nationalities as being equal and of equal value. We also have a sense of the sacred. So not when we are, there is some iconoclasm and iconoclastic, but we do have a sense of the sacred. So there are some things that you actually have to respect. And it, went on from there. It happened quite a number of years back, so I can't recall all the elements, but what emerged from this conference is that Ukrainian culture is a culture that has values that, in fact, we really love and cherish. And I think that's why we stick with it, is because it does have those values that we find fulfilling in our own lives and useful in our own lives. The other thing that we did at the center, and it's not just me, we had many partners that we worked with, like the Department of Education, the Professional and Business Club, the Olenka Bilash at the in the Department of Education. We worked with the Shkina Rada in Toronto, and with educators in Saskatchewan and Manitoba. And through that partnership, we truly did innovative things. So for example, we were first given the challenge of publishing the Nova series that was developed by Olenka Bilash and a set of teachers. And the reason I got involved in that is because it had an approach to teaching the language that I really agreed with. And that was to learn language as a functional language, as an engaging language, as fun. And I was really happy to have my children be exposed to that approach in learning Ukrainian. And then the challenges are incredible because, the just publishing resources for the teaching of Ukrainian is challenging in Canada. And at that time it was challenging because you had to brace the different ways of youth, different khveli, right? And what is Ukrainian and what isn't Ukrainian? So we actually stuck to the old pravopis, which is quite good because because that's where the whole pravopis debate has ended up, in that the old pravopis, in fact, has been adopted more and more by all the changes. And also, and also we had to deal with the question of online materials, right? How do we get materials online? That was a challenge, and we met that with a very wonderful website and a portal, in fact, called Umrum. We had to deal with different aspects of the curriculum that were being introduced. So the whole question of the communicative approach to language, intercultural skills, also the accuracy of language. So each of these new curriculum challenges we had to meet, research, and then incorporate into materials. So we were challenged, and we met the challenge. Unfortunately, I don't consider myself a success in that area, because just after I left, much of that center has been cut out of funding, and just was not able to continue the kind of work that we did. I was, so in a sense, I left with a feeling of not being able to protect something that I consider to be really important in our community, and that is to service the teachers and the students from K to 12.
Is that center funded by government funds?
Well, no, it was a decision, actually, and this is what surprised me the most, was it was a decision of the Canadian Institute of the Ukrainian Studies itself. And that obviously there became a funding crunch, and so the area that got to have the brunt was the educational area.
Understood. My next I can't talk today. My next question is, how did SUSK help you in your career and or personal development?
Yeah, I actually never thought of a career when I looked at what I was going to do. I um, I was more guided by the things that I thought needed addressing and that I was interested in working on. Um, I mean, SUSK for me was a really important time of my life for solidifying my values and helping me decide what I was passionate about and what I wasn't passionate about. I had made lifelong friends in SUSK, and I remember, I am now 72, and I remember with great fondness the people that I worked with. So there's a lifelong connectiveness there. Um, I think that what SUSK does, it also provided me with a way to be active. And when you find that you're active and you're doing things, that you are in fact more alive and you're doing more with your life than what you should than not. So in that regard, I found that SUSK was in fact for me, I guess, a standard for my life, and that if I'm doing something to better the situation, then that's good. And if I'm not, then there's a feeling of, well, get on it, you know.
Okay, makes sense. And my last question is, and I agree with that. My last question is, do you have any tips for current students? This can be related to the Ukrainian community or career tips, anything you'd like to share.
Well, I think what's really important is that at this time of life, it really be important for you to really get to know what you love to do, and not to give up on it. Um, I've seen people who were very talented in one way or another, and they had a love, but they gave it up for career. On the other hand, I have seen people who had certain loves of what they did, and that turned out to be a career. So it's quite important to be fairly flexible about what a so-called career means. And basically, I think we need to make a living so that we can support ourselves. Okay, great. If you can do that in a way that is combined with your passions and your intellectual interests, then all the better. And that's what you should try and get. And then you approximate it, right? You either get more or less of what you need, but truly listen to what your interests are and follow those.
Okay, thank you. Дуже дякую. It was great to hear from you, and I'm sure others will also enjoy hearing from you and your experience. Слава Україні! Героям слава!
Дуже дякую. І знову бажаю вам всього найкращого у цьому дуже у цьому світі з такими викликами, що тяжко було повірити, що вони будуть такі, але вони є. І вони дуже, але світ дуже щасливий, що має людей, так як ти і твої друзі, котрі будуть з цим впорюватися. Добре, дякую.